Hello and welcome to the Paddock Pass Podcast, brought to you by Renthal Street. Check out renthal.com and the Fit My Bike option for all the parts that will fit your motorcycle. On today's podcast, we're going to be looking at some of the technical regulations for 2027. We're going to look at the rider market as well and a few listener questions. David Emmett, I'm going to come to you straight away at the start because we have to set the scene for where you are, Dave. You're waiting for your vegan sausage roll in Greg's and you look so happy about that situation.
I am actually quite. After Piers Morgan complained about the vegan sausage roll, then I'm definitely very looking forward to trying one because it has to be fantastic.
Yeah, the woke Emmett and his vegan sausage roll. You wouldn't see Neil Morrison dealing with that kind of situation. It's a full-on British sausage roll for you, Neil.
Although the vegan sausage rolls from Greg, I have to say, 2 thumbs up from me.
Let's move on to Adam then in that case. Got no time for this, Neil. Adam, you've got no issue. Right now, you're in Barcelona, the sun's out, you're nowhere near a Greg's with a vegan sausage roll.
Steve, you're way off the mark. It's absolutely pissing down in Barcelona. And considering I'm due to pick up a motorcycle for a 3-week loan, I'm slightly worried about the state of the weather. And I'm sure, if Neil sampled one sausage roll or like a meat pie or something in Greg's, then he's had 3 or 4. So he probably knows what he's talking about more than any of us.
Well, as you well know, Neil wouldn't have paid for those. He would have just stolen them off someone else's plate. But Adam, you're just after mentioning that you've got a little bit of a loan bike coming up. What have you got?
KTM are coming through. They're giving us to use on the podcast. Well, just for me, really. A KTM 990 Duke. So a brand new bike. I mean, I think it's like 96% new. I think the only thing carried over from maybe the 890 or one of the other Dukes are the brakes. The rest of it's a brand sort of spanking new motorcycle. So we're going to have I'm going to have that for a couple of weeks and hope to be providing listeners with an update on how it feels. If it's anything to do or anything like the other Dukes, then it's going to be like loads of talk, a lot of fun. It's going to turn heads at traffic lights and hopefully get some decent enough weather to give it a blast.
Yeah, it's going to be plenty loud enough to be able to turn some heads as well. And that's always important in the middle of Barcelona, with the way the traffic situation is there. And that's going to be good fun to be able to see what you say for that. And obviously, there's a little bit of a break between now and Aston as well. So you got a week really to blast around before you have to get yourself over to Daveland. As it is, though, Neil, we've already seen that Dave's internet connection, not what it needs to be for him there in that Greg's. But for you, Neil, when you look back at the last couple of weeks, you've obviously had a little bit of time off, but you've been able to sit back and watch some of the TT as well. Obviously, for me, I was out at it, so I was busy. But I think it was an exciting couple of weeks.
It was indeed, Steve. Yeah. Those double headers with the Moto E rounds just really take it out of me. So I needed at least 2 or 3 days of just sitting on the sofa, doing very little other than listening to the action and stuff going on at the TT, which was fantastic. I know Adam and Dave aren't massive into road racing, but when there was racing last week, it really was of the highest quality. And I'm always amazed at how you can have races over 3-4 laps at the TT with such fine winning margins. I think the Superstock TT was 2 seconds at the end after like over 100 miles of racing. Just ridiculously crazy stuff. And from what I gather, it was a relatively safe TT as well. You can maybe update me on that, Steve. But, that's always a bonus when that happens, a massive bonus.
Yeah, obviously a few crashes during the course of TT, but when you look back at it, we had bad weather. We were really affected by practice time being limited as well. And they ended up having a pretty safe TT all in all. And I think especially for everyone after the last few years, that's one of the big factors that has to always be played into it. But as you mentioned as well, Neil, like that Superstock race, myself and Tony were up at Renthal and you're waiting for the updates to come in all the time. And it's exciting whenever you know that it's coming down to those last couple of seconds.
Fair play, Steve, for all the content you put up on the channels as well, both for the podcast and for Patreon. Getting sort of the senior TT winner as well was a stroke of luck. I mean, that was cool. I mean,
it was well judged. Well judged, Adam.
Yeah. But it was, I think the biggest story obviously was Michael Dunlop. I just wondered, Steve, what's he kind of like to deal with? I mean, did you ever sort of have any press interaction with him? I mean, I think he's got a bit of a reputation for being a little bit aloof, hasn't he? And doesn't sort of engage much in the PR side. Any sort of stories from that?
Yeah, Michael's one of the most elusive riders that you'll see typically at the TT. Usually in the road racing paddock, everyone's very open, wants to talk, wants to get involved, wants to give themselves a bit of coverage. And then Dunlop is the exact opposite of that. He's always been a bit shy about wanting to deal with the media. Letting his guard down has always been a big issue. And for me, one of the best interviews I ever saw with him was the TT podcast. They did an hour-long show with him, and they managed to get him to open up. And it explained so much about who he is as a person and why he is the way he is. But this year at the TT, he seemed much more relaxed than I've seen him in the 10 years that I've been working at the TT. He seemed that he wasn't turning away from a camera when there was one put in his face. He wasn't trying to avoid eye contact. Anytime he was talking, whether it was TV, radio, in the pits, just chatting to punters, he seemed much more open about himself. And I think it's one of those things that sort of struck me as it wasn't coincidental that this has happened the year that he's become the king of the mountain, because certainly for a rider like him, he's always been in the shadow of his uncle Joey, or to a lesser extent his dad Robert. And now he stands alone. And he really seemed like a man that just became comfortable with his status. And I thought that was really exciting to see, because he's so fast, he's so aggressive on the bike, and he's amazing to watch around the TT. And that's where I think this year we really got to see that. Especially, you look back at the first Superbike race, it's a race that was, in his eyes, stolen from him by the visor issue he had. And then he's still able to react from that and win again for the rest of the week. And I thought that was really impressive. But for me, the TT was just a really good, fun TT this year. We were able to get McGuinness, Dean Harrison, Davey Todd, Pete Hickman, Stephen Davison and Kyle White gave us a lot of time as well. So I have to say a big thanks to them, because it gave us an awful lot of content, whether it was for Patreon or for the general podcast platforms as well. And it ended up being one of our busiest weeks that we've ever had really on the podcast. We had over 30,000 listens. And I think, it shows the reach that the TT can have from it.
Yeah, I just think it was something about the 26. I mean, I didn't see all that much coverage, but there were a few kind of clips, and you would imagine that sort of number was just on his mind. It was certainly on the radar, and it was one of the big sort of narratives. And I just, if anyone who's kind of become curious in the TT recently, watch the film Road. I mean, I think it's incredibly revealing, also very emotional. He's sort of one of the principal stars, obviously being a Dunlop of that. I think it's narrated by Liam Neeson. I haven't seen it for quite a while, but it's a really powerful film about road racing. And, all this talk at the TT this year about them doing a Netflix series and doing another sort of Hollywood style production, you kind of think, well, we're closer to the edge, and films like Road, it's a lot of it's been covered. I wonder where they could go with it next.
Well, I think it's always one of those things where a lot of it's been covered, but you think that about football and basketball and American football, and they always find ways to find new stories. And Dave, I know that that's always one of the things that you've always found really interesting about the NFL is the history stories, the backstories, and their behind the scenes stuff. And I think that's where the TT needs to go next. But I've seen so much of an increase in their professionalism over the course of the last couple of years that I'd be full of confidence for what they're going to be able to do with documentaries or films or anything else. But those behind the scenes stories, Dave, that's what catches a new audience, really.
Yeah, 100%. Especially someone like Michael Dunlop, as you say, coming from a racing family and finding his feet by, finally getting the success that he needed to prove, perhaps to himself more than anything. And I think, one of those sort of inside racing stories will work really well on Netflix, wherever it might be, just because it is all, the English is the language where everyone uses, and it opens it up to a much larger audience.
Yeah, I do think that's always the key thing, and I think that's definitely what we saw with the MotoGP series, that being in English makes a big difference, and it'd be interesting to see what comes out from it. But Dave, we're going to move it on to MotoGP content now, and the rider market, I think, is one of the things that everyone's a little bit interested in right now. So we're going to just go a little bit quick fire around a few names. If anyone wants to jump in with any additional comments, just feel free. But Dave, I'm going to start off with you about Jack Miller, and what does the future hold for Jack? Because he's one of the most popular riders on the grid. He's a marketable rider, but it's been such a struggle for him jumping onto the KTM. Obviously, Pedro Acosta now confirmed to be that factory KTM rider for next year, and Jack's now on the lookout for a ride. What's he going to do?
That's a very good question. I mean, at Mugello, he was very clear that what he wanted to do was go to the Tech 3 team, in part just because he wants to stay inside the KTM family, keep developing the bike. He sort of like literally said, this is what I signed up for. I don't want to finish sort of like when we're halfway through. And I think probably his first option is Tech 3. There is going to be a seat there. It looks like we're losing Augusto Fernandez. It looks like obviously Pedro Acosta is going to the factory team. Anea Bastianini will be one rider there. The second one, Jack Miller definitely has to have a shot. And I'm not sure who would be much better, really, to replace him, but it's going to be interesting. I think I would really like to see Jack Miller in World Superbike, not for just because I think he would be really, really good for the series. He's a great, large, big personality. Would be really good for the profile of the series, and having a prominent Australia being fast would be great.
Yeah, I have to say, Dave, like for me, I'd love to see Jack in World Superbikes, but I wouldn't be surprised if that takes a little bit of time for it to happen, because the lure of staying in MotoGP is always great for riders because there's the money to stay in MotoGP, and that has to be one of the big deciding factors for a lot of the decisions that we'll see. But I think for Jack, the option to go to World Superbikes will always be there. The option to have another year in MotoGP, probably not.
Yeah, exactly. And, you think of what Jack can bring. Obviously, he's a talented rider. He's a multi-Grand Prix winner, which, counts for a lot. He was one of the reasons why Ducati were able to build up ahead of steam. His development input was pretty good. I think KTM appreciated that as well. It's been a really poor season this year for him. It's been difficult, but you just have to look across the garage as well at his teammate, and it's been a tough time for Brad Binder as well. It's been a tough time for all the KTM riders except for Pedro Acosta this year. And Jack can bring good vibes, good harmony to a team. He's excellent on the kind of PR side as well. He does bring a lot along with the kind of riding side, which you would think would be a bit of a coup for some teams. So yeah, I think we'll see him in MotoGP still. Just kind of depends on where that is.
Yeah, for my sort of 2 pennies worth, I mean, Miller's like a popular rider in MotoGP. I don't think we can forget that. It's been a very poor season in 2024, and then after starting so brightly, I think with the KTM at the beginning of 2023, people expected a bit more. I think he's only got 1 podium finish in Orange, outside of the sprints, and yeah, I think just the fact that he's a native English speaker, we're not exactly overflowing with those in the sport. He has obviously vast experience, like you guys have mentioned. I think it would be a little bit of a loss to the series if he goes, maybe not towards the podium fight or anything like that. And I do know inside KTM, they really valued the way that he is able to sort of create a good team environment and how he was giving feedback and working for the projects overall as a whole, rather than just thinking, wow, it's Mugello this weekend, I've got to aim for a top 3. So I don't know. I have no idea where he can go. Will he fill the last seat in Tech 3? Possibly. But if the KTM door's closed, then really it's only perhaps HRC and even more of a back seat, you could say, in terms of being in the limelight.
Yeah, I think that the HRC one is one that we've heard rumoured a little bit in Superbikes as well, where a year, 2 years in MotoGP and then moved into Superbikes being an option as well. But just to move on to Augusto Fernandez as well, obviously, Adam, he's been mentioned in the Jack Miller chat about what could happen in Tech 12. What about Augusto for you?
There's 2 things there, Steve. One, he's obviously a world champion, and he had a half decent rookie season last year, but then he's just been completely upstaged by Pedro Acosta. But then to a degree, so has Miller and Binder. I don't think that's anything to be totally ashamed by. I mean, I think if those 3 KTM riders were knocking it out in terms of results and Augusto was lagging like he's doing at the moment, then it looks pretty bad. But he just seems to be struggling a little bit with the setting of the RC16 this year, combined with the new Michelin tire construction. I just wondered if it's too early to boot him out of the Premier class. It just seems, I mean, okay, he's not super young. He's not like Acosta's age or anywhere near it. But you think, a season and a half, is that all you're really going to get? I don't know. I mean, even like his namesake has been given a bit more time, even though he's another one that's also potentially on the chopping block. So I can't see him staying in Tech 3, but then where does he end up? That's the other issue.
Yeah, I mean, he definitely sort of deserves more of a chance, and I think he'd do well in a team that actually sort of where he could be nurtured. But it does seem like the arrival as Acosta has made his head completely go. He lacks confidence, doesn't know how to ride the bike, and can't find a way to ride the bike. So it just seems like they've given up.
Neil, what do you think about Augusto as well? Obviously, you've seen him come through Moto2, especially whenever you were doing the commentary on that. So you've been able to probably pay a little bit more attention to his really good times in his career than the rest of us.
Yeah, I mean, nothing really to add to what Dave and Ad had said. It's been a tough time. I think he's had 4 point scoring rides so far this year. He hasn't had one top 10. And yeah, he really hasn't kicked on from last year. And yeah, just the fact that he looks kind of so listless is quite alarming. Yeah, it's clear that the guy's confidence is completely shot. So yeah, tricky to see where he goes. And I kind of feel this with one or two other riders. You know, he's another Spaniard on the grid. There are already quite a few of those, and he's a really lovely lad, but he's not got like the crazy big personality or anything like that. So it's kind of difficult to see, you know, marketing potential and where he kind of stands with that. So yeah, I struggle to kind of see Augusto keeping a seat in MotoGP, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, I think that's probably a good way to look at it as well, Neil, because I always think for these rider decisions, if I was managing the team, who would I want to have or where would I want to have them? And at the end of the day, you can pick a lot of riders, I think, that can give you the same performance as Augusto. You might have some that's got a slightly higher ceiling. And Adam, that actually brings us nicely to Raul Fernandez, because I know that right back to his Moto3 days, you've always been a big believer in his raw speed. And again, we saw flashes of it, Catalonia, for instance, already this year. But since he's come into the Premier class, it has been a disappointment. This is his third year, and you're just pinning on to little things of light, really, from Raul Fernandez.
Yeah, he's just had another arm pump operation as well. It just seems to be lots of little niggles that have, just dented the way. Of course, pre-season crashing and taking the concussion exactly wasn't. I think it was also, did he have a back injury as well? I can't remember what the injury it was before the start of the year. But I mean, the raw speed is there, Steve. I mean, everyone was milking over his Moto2 season and how he fought so brilliantly with Remy Gardner, pretty much off the bat. And that's obviously a sign of a guy who has talent to ride motorcycles. The only other big factor I think Raul has in his kind of corner at the moment is the fact that he's only 23. And again, what do you do with a guy who's already got 3 seasons in MotoGP, but at that age? I think it's you've invested this much to date. Why suddenly write it off? And I think it was in Catalonia where we were asking him about his future in MotoGP, and he seemed actually quite optimistic. He wasn't sort of concerned, or wasn't sort of saying, well, I'm looking for another job, pretty much like Jack Miller and Augusto Fernandez were. So I wonder if maybe Raul has been given another year or two as part of the Aprilia structure. We'll have to see.
On the other hand, perhaps that's just his personality. He doesn't seem the sort of person to admit to weakness. He's always going to say, no, I'm definitely going to get the factory Aprilia rides. Don't worry about me. Yeah, I mean, I think like Raul Fernandez, I have been down on Raul Fernandez, and the dude has talent coming out his ears. There's absolutely no doubt about it, but he just never seems to be able to show it, or far too rarely. And he is, as Neil rightly said, another one of these surplus Spaniards. There's lots of them around. And you just wish the last bit that he's missing is his attitude and his intellect. He needs to be much smarter about what he's doing. If he could do that, then he would absolutely deserve to be in there. But there's been no sign that he can do that.
Yeah, I think Raul's first year in MotoGP, you could question his application and his sort of desire. Obviously, didn't really work out that well when sort of KTM made him stick to the contract that I think he signed twice with them to be in MotoGP in 2022. But if you look at this year, I mean, it's not what we were expecting from Raul, but there has been a steady improvement. His best overall finish in MotoGP has been, I think, 20th, and he's 12th currently in the championship. He's 3 places ahead of Miguel Oliveira, who I mean, I was certainly expecting Oliveira to be up there fighting for top sixes, maybe even top sixes in the championship this year, but it just hasn't happened so far. So by that metric, I don't think he's had he's not had a terrible season. I think there's definite improvements there. And we did see in Barcelona, I think the first flash of that rider that we thought we were getting when he took the Moto2 class by storm back in 2021. So it is tough. I mean, if you were Davide Brivio and Justin Marks in the Trackhouse racing team, has he done enough to warrant a seat again? Probably not. But then, that you do think that if it ever would click with Raul, the ceiling would be quite high because he, as Dave said, has so much talent. So I think it's a real quandary that Trackhouse find themselves in.
Yeah, I think the ceiling's very high, but unfortunately for Raul, we've also seen the floor is very low. And that's the decision that you have to make. One rider that we know is a high ceiling is Joan Mir, former world champion, miserable time on the Repsol Honda, and another rider that's gone to Honda and just looks like a shell of a man. Dave, what does the future hold for Joan Mir? Just to throw you under the bus, Dave,
Yeah, exactly. No, Joan Mir is fascinating. I genuinely like Joan Mir, and yet the things you hear out of Honda is that nobody he works with likes him. So that's always a sign. I think he gets frustrated really easily, and it's almost sad because he will sort of like sit there and basically like slag HRC off and Honda off in front of HRC personnel, which is less than graceful. He says that nobody has ever left Honda in a better situation than when they joined him. So there's that.
Financially better off.
Well, yes. I mean, yes, they might have bought a third yacht, but they will not be feeling, in terms of results, not necessarily. So, yeah, I think he's looking for a door. I think he's looking for the way out. The dilemma is he really needs results to get a better seat. But on the Honda, he's just not getting the results. So even though he has been quite fast a couple of times, quite fast compared to the other Hondas, obviously. Where is he going to go? I don't know. You would expect him maybe to go to Trackhouse, maybe to get on an Aprilia, but just something which isn't a Honda. Also, if you do wonder if Yamaha do get the satellite team, if Pramac do switch to Yamaha, I think Joan Mir could be a candidate there.
Yeah, I think Mir came into the season the new leader in the Repsol Honda squad after Mark left, and almost was putting that sort of responsibility on his own shoulders. And you saw that in a couple of performances earlier in the season. I think he actually rode really well in a couple of those early races, especially in Portimao, Jerez, where he scored, decent points and was the top Honda, the most impressive Honda by quite some distance. But speaking to one or two people involved in the HRC project, they've said in the last couple of weeks, the motivation really has started to wane, just because no great improvements have been forthcoming from the Japanese manufacturer, and that sort of frustration has started to grow. There were some doubts even a couple of weeks ago that Joan, one of the rumors I heard, I think in Barcelona, was that Joan was really seriously considering retirement for next year. But then he clarified that in Mugello and said, no, I'm sticking around. I'm gonna be on the grid next year. Although he certainly was hinting that it wasn't going to be at HRC. So yeah, I think Trackhouse could be an option. Maybe Pramac, if they switch to Yamaha, could be an option as well. And we have to remind ourselves we're talking about a double world champion and a guy that won the MotoGP championship in just his second year. So he is a quality rider when the situation is right. But yeah, it's now 2.5 seasons on the bounce where Joan has had a really, really torrid time, and it's mentally, I think it's just tough to come back from that.
Yeah, I think also that's not the first time retirement talk has popped up. I think it was around Le Mans this time last year as well, where he was just really, really down in the dumps. I mean, I think it's fair to say he's out of Honda. I don't think he'll re-sign, even if they bumped up his pay by a considerable amount. Luca Marini seems to be saying that HRC are on the way and they're going to be competitive, and progress is going to come. But then Mir, I think, has just added him to the pile that's been burnt by the RCV. And I just think it's track house or bust. I can't really see him sort of fitting in anywhere else, to be honest. But I mean, he's only 26. He should be entering the prime of his career as a MotoGP racer. But talk of retirement is not unrealistic when you consider these guys have been going at it since they're sort of 12, 13, 14 years old. So, yeah, we'll have to see.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that there is always that talk of rumors of retirement or switching to superbikes or different things, because Franco Morbidelli is probably one of the next high-profile riders that we can look to have a little bit of a chat about, because Morbidelli, obviously, all the injuries this year have played a big role. But also, one of the things about Morbidelli is it's that one crazy year of 2020 that gives you hope for him as a MotoGP rider, Adam. And it's a little bit like Mir, because that was the COVID year. Mir wins his world championship. Morbidelli was second. I think the rest of his MotoGP career, he's had one top 10 championship finish. It's been a rough run for him. And now, obviously, after all the injuries in the winter and starting the season on the back foot, he's had a good weekend in Italy in Mugello. But is there enough there that you would want to have him on your bike for next year?
Yeah, that's right, Steve. I think he's really fighting against the clock. And, I think the argument against is 2.5 years since he last appeared on the podium. The argument for is that, of course, he's part of VR46, and which means that he's a member of one of the sort of kind of lodge or associations behind the scenes with the most power. So you think if some rider can be tucked somewhere on some sort of deal, it's going to be one of the Italian stables. So maybe Franco gets a reprieve and a bit more time to prove himself on the Ducati.
Dave, what about you for Franco? Is he flawed, or is he a rider that you're waiting to get that 2020 again?
I mean, he is talented. He is clever. Also, he's had to work hard to get to where he is. Again, there seem to be better riders around. We're waiting for Marco Bezzecchi to get better. I think he gets the VR46 ride if Marco Bezzecchi gets if Marco Bezzecchi goes to Aprilia, as we're sort of half expecting. Yeah, I mean, but he's one of those where you are basically waiting around for a better rider to turn up. Now, at the moment in Moto2, there aren't really very many better riders to turn up, but he is part of the VR46 sort of family, so they will find a place for him if there is one going.
And his debriefs are amazing.
And his debriefs are amazing. They really are. It's like you're on another planet.
It's gripping.
It can be something. It is. It's genuinely. He reminds me of Dylan off of the Magic Roundabout, and that's a proper throwback for all the old people out there. Who was a hippie rabbit, by the way. But anyway, he is extremely a very strange young man, and plenty talented. But yeah, he really needs to show something, and I do think he did get a really, really bad start with the crash at Portimao.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously been a tough year for Franco, and I feel sorry for him in a way, because he's being measured against the other guys on that bike who were first, second and third in the last race that we had in the Italian Grand Prix. So expectations are very high, but there have been a few signs that he is approaching some proper speed. I mean, he was fourth in the sprint at Mugello, sixth in the race. He was seventh, I think, at Le Mans, which is pretty good result, all things told. And where I think we were maybe expecting him to be at certain points this year, maybe it's too little too late. I mean, it's going to be interesting, but yeah, I wouldn't say, I think the fact that he's really not been present in any of these conversations about who goes where for next year. I mean, Franco's really so far down the pecking order. I think that just kind of shows where he slipped to in MotoGP now.
Yeah, I think it's one of those ones where, as Adam said, if it wasn't for the VR46 connection, I don't think you'd be thinking that he's going to be getting much chance of being anywhere else for next year. And Adam, that kind of brings us to probably one of the last big interesting stories. If you look at, obviously, people like Alex Marquez, Alex Rins, there's stories there about what they're going to do. But I think Miguel Oliveira is probably the most interesting one, because Miguel, he brings with him Portimao in Portugal. And what's going to happen for him next year? We've already obviously touched on him a little bit whenever we talked about Raul Fernandez. But What do you see for Oliveira? Because this is a guy that's won Grand Prix, but you're just not seeing it now.
There are not many riders, I think, with the poor luck of injuries that Miguel's had. And like you say, Steve, I mean, he brings with him the Portuguese fans' passion and era, when things go right or go terribly wrong for him. Again, I think he would be a loss, if he doesn't stick around in MotoGP. He may be a good contender for the HRC saddle. I think a mature rider with a lot of experience now with 2 different European brands in the class. Of course, he hasn't ridden the Ducati, but he's ridden the next 2. So why not, if you were a Japanese senior race manager, then think, okay, Oliveira's on the market. He maybe is a bit cheaper than we would normally get him. Let's see if he's interested in 2 years of trying to guide us back to the top. I think there are definitely worse options than him. I mean, you wouldn't want to take maybe the relative inexperience of someone like Raul Fernandez or Augusto Fernandez when, Oliveira is there and maybe is of a similar price point. So there's that going for him. And, just for his wonderful dry sense of humor alone, it would be a shame if Miguel is not doing debriefs and ripping into the stupid questions he faces from the likes of us every week.
A question, Adam. Do you take Miguel Oliveira over Maverick Vinales? Because we have heard that Maverick has been flaunting his wares in front of Alberto Puig.
Oh, for Honda, that's a difficult question. If I was a race team manager and I was presented with like Maverick and also Miguel, like on similar contract terms, then I'd probably lean more towards Vinales just from race winning potential. I mean, Oliveira made it happen, 2 years in a row with KTM, one on the satellite bike and then also one on the official bike. But I think, as frustrating as he can be, Maverick just has a little bit more potential to put things right on a given weekend, as we saw in Austin. So, tricky one, Dave. I mean, the thing is, it could go very positively kind of pre-Yamaha meltdown for Vinales, or it could be that sort of position where he's on a race bike developing the Aprilia and it doesn't work at all. So I think I'd, go for the Spaniard more. You?
I'm glad I don't have to make that decision.
Nice and comfy on the fence.
Dave, I know you were quite keen as well just about Alex Rins, just to give a mention about his future, because he's one of the interesting riders just on the basis of the fact that he's won races on a Suzuki and he's won races on a Honda. And then obviously this year in the Yamaha has been a different story. Yeah,
I mean, he was. I spoke to Maya Marigali, had a little sort of, just a quiet chat with him, and Marigali was really, really keen on Rins, very impressed with his feedback and all the rest of it. But it does seem like the leg which he broke last year at Mugello is taking a very, very long time to heal. And there is talk that he was discussing, whether he should retire or not with some other riders a few weeks ago. So I think there is a non-zero chance that he would, because he's got lots of money. He's won some races. He has a young family. He has a young kid. Again, like a lot of riders, he has his son's name, Lucas, on the back of his bike. And he's sort of like sitting there thinking, like, is this really what I want to do? Do I really want to keep pushing and keep risking injuring my leg again? I know that he got advice to not to race at the end of last year to let his leg heal. But the fact that he's still limping around tells you how bad that injury is. So, I mean, for sure there is a place that we're for him at Yamaha if he wants. But I would not be surprised if he did decide to retire.
Adam, just very quickly, just to finish up this chat about the rider market, we had a question in as well from Jeff Jackson about how MotoGP contracts are structured in terms of whether it's bonuses, contract length, wages. Just what do you know about that?
About MotoGP, not so much. I mean, I've seen a few MXGP rider contracts, and of course, there is a base sort of salary which can be hacked away, if a rider misses a certain amount of races through injury, because the teams are forced to replace said rider with somebody else. And then, of course, you have incentives on top of that, Steve, bonuses, depending on the contract and the rider. It could be a top 5 bonus, a top 7, top 3, and then a win. Championships pretty much work the same thing. Also, there are certain clauses in terms of where you finish in the championship and how it affects your salary for the following year, or whether, the manufacturer or the team have to automatically deal with you for a contract renewal. So there are little things in there like this. As we found out in the past, if riders also have strict guidelines about what they can and cannot say about a brand. I mean, we always admire the fact that MotoGP riders can be quite outlandish and forthright with their opinions about the sport and the motorcycles and the teams and whatever else. But they can only go to an extent. If a brand or a team feels that a rider's been taking their name into disrepute, you could say, then they can get fined. I mean, there are penalties in contracts that deal with that. But I think, as a rough guide, I heard towards the end of 2018, like Marc Marquez was earning in the region of 200,000 to 300,000 euros a race just in bonuses, from his various sponsors, Red Bull, Alpine Star, Shoei. I'm not sure if he had Estrella Galicia at that point or Alliance. There's various sponsors, and then, for getting a certain amount of results or exposure, he's rewarded for that. And then, of course, you have Honda's contract rewards on top of that as well. So it can end up being quite a big nut. I mean, Dave says that Alex Rins is quite wealthy, but Rins hasn't really been able to bank on a championship bonus. He has been a factory rider for HRC for 1 year, and then, of course, for Suzuki. Although we do understand that Suzuki weren't perhaps the best payers. And you'd imagine his Yamaha contract is not going to be too shabby. But then depending on where Rins has made his investments and looked after his money, then, of course, Dave could be spot on. And he's actually someone who doesn't have to worry about disposable income so much for the rest of his days. But, yeah, it's I think we know that Marquez was earning a lot of money. And I think if you go down towards the end of the MotoGP grid, it gets a little bit more sparse. But still, there are incentives.
I think it's one of those things as well, lad, where for the riders, if you're in MotoGP, you can earn well. I remember speaking to one rider that had stepped up, and he said that in MotoGP, it's almost impossible not to earn €1 million a year just because of sponsorship and different things. But in every other class, it's almost impossible to earn anything. And I think that's the big challenge that everyone faces. You see it, you know what, like I'm just back from the TT. You see it in BSB, you see it in World Superbikes. How many of those riders aren't going to have to work when they finish their racing career? Because it's like anything else. It seems that, you're earning 300,000 a year. It's massive money. And it is. But the problem for most riders is it's only for a few years that they're earning that sort of money. The career is so short. The chance of getting another contract can be slim as well. And when you pay the taxman 45, 50% of it, suddenly that 300 grand is gone pretty quickly when insurance costs, motorhome costs, everything like that starts to come in. Because I think for a lot of riders to do the motorhome for Europe, I think costs €2,500 for each round. So you can imagine how much that costs over the course of a season. So there's a lot of factors that go into it. And hopefully for Jeff, we've been able to answer that question. And David, speaking of questions, we've got a pretty big interview from you. And we're just going to tee it up a little bit. It's about the technical regulations for 2027.
Yeah, exactly. At I think Barcelona, I spoke at some length with Corrado Cecchinelli, the technical director, director of technology is what he is, because I was very interested in what they were trying to achieve with the 2027 regs. He spoke sort of at great length and explained a lot about what they expect to be able to achieve. And also some of the things they know that they won't be able to achieve, like they really want to limit aerodynamics, but they know that aerodynamics, even though that they've sort of like cut down aerodynamics, it's still going to get away from them a little bit. But having a lot less horsepower because you're going to 850 cc, that's really going to make things easier. So, I was really grateful to Corrado. He was very, very open with us. Very, very interesting, and had a lot to say. It explained really quite clearly how they approached making the rules, and also, how they try to avoid people getting around the rules that they're trying to make.
Adam, what's your opinion on the rules for next year?
I think some of the teams and brands, and we had Seb Reeser from KTM recently on the podcast. It seems that, the rules have been published, but they're not strictly set in stone. I mean, Dave, I don't know if they could actually hover or be changed or flexed depending on what happens.
No, basically, what Corrado was explaining was that these are the rules, these are sort of the basics, and what they have to do now is actually write them down and put them into words. Because again, this was one of the things that I wanted to know. It's one thing saying, okay, we want to ban ride-out devices, but you can't just say, well, we ban ride-out devices, because it doesn't mean anything. You have to actually turn that into something meaningful. And again, this was something that Corrado was very interesting in explaining how you go from a concept to actually achieving your objective.
Yeah,
there's still plenty of time, isn't there? I
think,
and also, I mean, I do wonder when manufacturers are going to start working on this. Perhaps they hold off and still have to prioritize current race bikes for the next 18 months.
No, I mean, like they'll be start working on their engine designs already. They will be, I mean, all on paper. They won't actually start building them until sometime next year. The aerodynamics, the rest of it will be more of a long-term process. That, again, you can develop aerodynamics a lot more quickly than you can develop an engine. An engine takes a lot of time just to test, just to make sure the thing isn't going to go pop when you put it on the track.
Yeah, and I think for me, it'd be quite interesting to see what the regs actually end up being for how it'll impact things. David, obviously, we've got new Michelins coming in the near future as well, and different changes like that. It'll be interesting to see how that all plays out. But I have to say, I'm very interested to hear what Corrado had to say to you, because it's always interesting to have a good chat like this. And I think it's about 25 minutes, and he's very interesting and informative about what we're going to see going forward. And it's a great interview. So when we come back, we've another few questions from some of our listeners, and then we'll just wrap up the show.
I'm here with Corrado Cecchinelli, Director of Technology for MotoGP. You are the person responsible for these rules. For a lot of these rules, you led the process of putting them together. It's you putting forward proposals, manufacturers coming back and saying, we like this, we don't like this, this is what we would like to do. Talk about the whole process. 2-3 years?
Hi, David, first of all. I'm not responsible, and honestly, this time I'm not trying to remove a fault from myself. I would be proud to be the responsible. Of course, I have been deeply involved, and a lot of most of the ideas come from our side, but it was a process involving a number of stakeholders, if you want. The process started, it's very difficult to say, but we consider that to have taken like a couple of years from the initial concept. And the way it worked was that we as the organizer drafted a list of proposals, ideas, went through them together with the FIM, and finally tabled to the manufacturers, and then it was the object of a number, which I don't know, of manufacturers meetings. I'm saying I don't know because we were not at those meetings. Yeah. They were the MSMA meetings, and then a few times, a matter of a few back and forth, once the manufacturers had final opinions on each of the items under discussion, and so we switched back and forth between them and us to try to find a compromise. I mean that we have been very happy in more or less just saying yes to anything that was coming as unanimously agreed or unanimously amended.
Yeah.
We came in more into play as a political party when they were not all in agreement, and so we tried to strike the best balance so that everybody was equally unhappy.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, because no one is going to be happy. But you want everyone to be. Yeah, exactly. You want everyone to lose more or less the same amount.
But I tell you, we are pretty happy.
Yeah. Exactly. There seems to be two objectives to these rules. One was to slow the bikes down, to basically make the circuits safer for longer before they have to start adjusting that. And the other one seems to be to give something back to the rider and make sure that the show is good.
We feel we have a very good show, and which is obtained with a reasonable level of safety given the sport we are talking about. But still, we are used to work in consistent regulation terms with the manufacturers, and this one was going to expire in 27. So this was the time to ask, okay, the show is good, safety is reasonably good given what we are doing, but both can be better. So the idea was, despite not being in an alarming situation, trying to do even better. And luckily for us and for myself as a technician, most of the times you can, and this was the case, strike both goals with the same, by doing the same thing. And the third one is being cost effective. Which is also normally achieved in the same
because by cost effective, what you mean is that the cost of marginal gains has to get bigger and bigger, so it's just not worth it.
We have, for me, there are two things involved when we're talking about costs relevant to technical regulations. One is that it's the easy way to put it, which is, okay, racing here should be affordable for a potential player who is a top manufacturer. So on one hand, it's of course not affordable for you or me. But on the other hand, it should be affordable for those to which it is intended to. This is the easy way to put it. The other way to put it is to make the technical rules so that there is sort of strong decrease in technical return over investment. So that it will always be the case that if you are the biggest spender, you have more chances. But the difference between spending 10 times your opponent is not 10 times as effective. So this is a more refined way to put it that we tried to keep in mind with these regulations.
So, for example, the first 10 million should get you, I don't know, say a second. The next 10 million should get you a tenth of a second.
Yes. So if you have 20 millions, you will still spend them. But the difference over one that has just 10 will be dismal.
Exactly.
So this is the point. And together with the safety and, in our opinion, show, all of this could be achieved by not many significant changes.
Because looking at the rules, what I got from them was that you wanted to make an engine, which I think, because I interviewed you maybe last year or something, and you said what you wanted was to have more emphasis on torque and less on power. So downboring, so you've got, you've got...
It's not that technical. We wanted, because...
You want a flexible engine.
Across all these goals, there's a sustainability. And so what we wanted about, if we're talking about engines, was not in general, but as for engines, more than ever, was road relevance. So I'm answering a question you didn't ask. This is not the same as the 800, because we have been very careful to put a design limitation, which basically is the bore, which is very simple. As I told you, we wanted to do a few effective things, not a lot of minor details, which will enforce the design to put emphasis on efficiency, rideability, and so on. So we have been careful in always focusing on road relevance, which is across to all these things. So we, as for the engines, basically it was we can split for me in some big areas. One is engine, one is aerodynamics, ride-eye devices, and the environment. Okay, these are more or less the areas. So in all of them, and engines in particular, we wanted to be road relevant. So take another example, one less engine, so that we took the chance to further push manufacturers into thinking about what is best to make these engines last and not only be, can I say, sacrifice engines that
because ideally in racing what you want to do is to cross the line, win the race, and bite a full of pole.
Yes, that would be ideal, and
but that is not very environmentally friendly.
No, it is also. I don't think this is happening. The only aspect in which I see it happening is the amount of fuel they put on the bike. That is really, they cross the line, and it's but ideally we wanted to push them to address the exercise of the optimum quantity of engines per season in terms of season costs. This is not very easy. It's not a very easy concept for a fan or for someone who is not involved, but it's not that by saying 3 engines you spend less than 6, or by saying 12 you spend less than 6. There's an optimum, which is an interesting technical challenge. And it looks like with the new regulation, 6 was achievable. Yeah,
because that, again, making engines which are reliable at that level of performance for that mileage is directly applicable, because it seems that when I look at the way that service intervals have grown from on motorbikes, you know, it's no longer every 5,000 kilometers, it's 10,000 kilometers.
And tens of thousands.
Yeah, exactly, in 20,
I can give you my opinion, which is not proven, but I think that if with an engine, a MotoGP engine, present MotoGP engine now, you go on the road, it's never end. I think it's forever. It's already surprising to me that they can make a season now with 7 engines, and normally they save something. So if you say 7, it means 6, maybe. Yeah. Not everybody uses the very last engine to the very last kilometer. This is already surprising, but I have my doubts that if you give 7 road engines to these guys, they can make a championship.
Yeah, exactly. Also, the change of because the reduction of the number of gear ratios, that is also again about rideability.
That is something that makes a considerable cost difference on costs and the sustainability in general, because silly as it may sound, they are very heavy to carry around the world, and so limiting the number of ratios would again achieve a number of goals, one of which is then you need a better engine. Yeah. And the other one was you are carrying a lot less weight around the world for nothing.
Yeah, exactly. For no reason other than to
than to increase performance, which is not the point. I mean, performance is not what we miss.
No, exactly. Speaking of which, aerodynamics, because aerodynamics, can we see aerodynamics and the removal of ride height devices as two separate things, or
yes.
are they okay?
They are separate. Of course, they are related in technical terms, but then everything is. But in our approach, yes, they were definitely separate matters.
Is the Pandora's box already open for aerodynamics? Because it now seems like the factories really... I mean, at first, you could see that the manufacturers were putting wings on in the hope of achieving something and not really understanding it. Now they seem to be getting deeper and deeper and deeper into it and really understanding the full three-dimensional way that aerodynamics works.
I think aerodynamics are a hugely complex matter, even for those that work on that, which is not us. I mean, they are aerodynamics at the present stage is not exactly 100% predictable. So there's an important amount of trial and error involved, which in the end means costs. And so there's, for me, we are in a very, it's getting more mature, but we are still in a learning process as motorcycling. And so, which makes our job of limiting expenses into aerodynamics harder, because it's very hard for us to find a correct wording to tell you what you can and what you can't do. So we got around it by setting maximum dimensions, and you basically do what you want inside of that. And then from 27, these basic dimensions will be reduced. Because we are not able to specify wordings that exactly prescribe what you can and what you can't do, even if this was right, because I'm not even convinced that that was right. I mean, so this is for us a practical way around. And again, reducing the surfaces is definitely in the direction of reducing the return over investment in aerodynamics.
Okay. So basically, because there's less room to work with, there's the to get the additional gains.
The bigger the bike can be, the better, the biggest is the advantage for the best designer.
Exactly. But I mean, like, one of the interesting developments we've seen is the use of the ground force effect fairings, where people are using it to corner faster.
This is for me, the very last step they made is moving from downforce in a straight line to how can I say? Downforce, if you want, or ground effect, cornering force. Yes, this is the new step they did, which is again difficult to control, but we're trying. I mean, we want to. We hope we found a good compromise, because the goal, even if it was possible, the goal is not to kill aerodynamic research overall. The goal was just, as I said, to reduce the effect, because this is what the riders asked in the safety commission on one side, and to reduce the return on investment on the other side.
So to make it so, for example, by being, because the thing the riders complain about is being behind other bikes. So you want to reduce that effect a lot, and you want to reduce.
We think the changes we are introducing will, of course, make the bike less aerodynamically heavy,
Yeah.
which should make a difference for a rider in the slipstream of another. Which means braking point predictability and the difference that the rider feels between being in the slipstream and immediately after
Yeah.
going out of the slipstream to pass.
Yeah.
Now it's a critical situation because they are much faster in the slipstream, so they believe they will be able to pass, but they are not, and they realize as soon as they try.
Yeah. Yeah.
We hope to reduce that.
Yeah. So to make the transition from being behind to being outside.
More natural, if you want, smoother.
Yeah, exactly. For it to be more predictable and understand. Yeah, exactly.
This is the goal, and for that we worked on mostly on the front top part of the body.
Because I also saw that there was some wording in there about changing the bottom part of the fairing or something.
The bottom is unchanged.
Okay.
The top and the bottom, there's a line.
Yeah.
And there's if you see the bike from the top, there's a tapered shape from the upper part and one for the lower part.
Yeah.
The lower is unchanged in width and shape.
Yeah.
The upper is changed in both.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Ride height devices. I mean, I think almost everyone except for Gigi Dall'Igna will be delighted that the ride height devices are gone. I mean, it was a brilliant piece. It was a brilliant idea, because what you're doing is temporarily changing the geometry. I don't think it's geometry. I think it's more.
It's actually the bike physics capability.
Yeah.
You are changing your bike, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Now, it's all very well to say ban ride height devices, but if you just put that in the rules, then they will just develop something else which is exactly the same, which isn't a ride height device. So how will you go about? I mean, how are you going to word that, describe that, so that people understand that they shouldn't be? Because what you're changing is, as you say, changing the physical capability of the bike. How do you ban that rather than?
The wording is yet to be written.
Yeah.
But there are some basic concepts that work. Don't forget that what we call ride height devices are banned in the other categories already.
Yeah.
And so there is a wording. The main point is talking in terms of banning devices that change the static height of the bike. This is the correct term. Because by that, it's clear you mean you allow suspensions, but you don't allow something that is in serious with the suspensions.
Yeah.
So this is one key factor. You can, and this is working in the other categories because, of course, I think that Moto2 and Moto3, even if the word was not correct, they are not trying because they know they would be killed by the technical director as soon as they try. So the fact that we don't have ride height devices in Moto2 and Moto3, to me, is not proving the wording is perfect. Is proving is not too bad, otherwise they would try. But it doesn't mean that if you put the same wording here, they are not trying something. So for me, this is a basic concept, the static height. Then there are other concepts that we could introduce, but this is just my opinion as you ask.
Yeah.
Like locking or unlocking. This is another concept that you can introduce. So we can work around these concepts. And
which of these do you think is going to have the biggest effect on the racing?
What do you mean?
Which one will have the biggest effects on the performance of the bike? Because 850. Also, we're reducing
all the items.
Of all of the items.
I think first is engine.
Yeah.
Then aerodynamics, and then ride height devices. but this is my opinion, and I think they all have a considerable effect. I mean, even just one makes a difference. It's not that, as I said, ride-eye devices as the last one, they won't make a difference. They will. And especially, I heard people saying that we could leave the whole shot because it's a simple device that everybody has.
Yeah.
All work. I mean, there's no one that is better than the other. They are the cost is born now, and so on. And all these arguments in favor, but this makes a huge difference for safety.
Yeah.
Because
we saw here last year in Barcelona.
Because it is packing all the riders at the first corner, and not only it has a packing effect, but the pack is way faster than without the whole shot. So even if this is a device that is actually doesn't make a big difference in cost, it does for safety, in our opinion. So we had no doubt that this should go as well.
All right, 2 more questions. One about, because there's also a reduction of fuel, but then with a smaller bore you should get better combustion and efficiency. Yes, because the chamber is easier to fill.
There's a reduction in fuel, and there's something that makes it easier, which is a smaller downboard engine, and something that makes it harder, which is 100% non-fossil fuels. So where is the balance, and whether 20 liters with the new engine is free, to so to say, I don't know. For me, of course, downboarding the engine will make it easier, but if you consider the new fuels, it's not a given. They will have to do something to achieve that.
Yeah.
Maybe they will move from having issues in 2 or 3 tracks to 5 or 6, I don't know.
You didn't look at, because I know in World Superbikes, this year I think they're monitoring fuel flow, and then next year they're going to manage performance, also do performance balancing, I think, using fuel flow. Was that an option, or would that not have been?
This is not something on the table at the moment. Also, consider that balancing performances doesn't really belong to MotoGP.
No, of course not.
It's more a superbike matter, because of course they
have to sell
because
the bikes.
of the concept. Yes,
Yeah,
because
exactly.
of the concept of that series, but less so in MotoGP. I'm not saying that is completely out of place, because any regulation is a sort of a performance balance, if you want.
Yeah.
But less so less so explicitly, if you want. You could argue that a fuel flow meter is, after all, a substitute for a fuel tank capacity. So this is not something we are talking about, but if someone comes up and says that this is better, we can consider that. For me, I have no experience on that, and looks more complicated to me. Then when I talk to the technical director about checking fuel tanks, he's telling me it's a nightmare because the fuel splashes, because they breathe fuel, because you are never sure that the tank is empty, and this and this. So depending on how you see it, it may be an option or not. I can tell you it's not under discussion.
No, exactly. Finally, one thing we know for 100% certain is that the engineers are going to try and find, they're going to find ways to cheat. And I don't mean cheat. What I mean is they're going to look at your rules and
find loopholes.
Exactly.
It's the more polite way.
That's the more polite way of saying
this
it.
is what Mike taught me.
Yeah.
They find loopholes. They are not cheating.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I remember I spoke to Mike Webb several years ago when he was still technical director, and he said the first thing at the beginning of every year, all the technical bosses would come round and visit him and apologise in advance for what they were going to do to his rules.
It's not like that anymore. They do that and without apologies.
Oh yeah. Slipping of standards.
But it's normal.
Yeah, it's not. Have you when you're thinking about that, are you also thinking about, okay, if we do that, then they might respond in this way.
Yeah.
They might try that.
We try.
Okay.
We try. There are also a number of. It's not exactly answering your question, but for your information, there are a number of, for instance, details about electronics that are not covered by the regulations,
Yeah.
but that we are working on
Yeah.
to make. In that case, I would use the word cheating harder.
Yeah.
Not because we think that someone is cheating, but it's, I mean,
Yeah.
the strongest is your door, the better you sleep.
Yes, exactly.
Wherever,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
So yes, we are always thinking about that, and this is why we try to make things as simple as we can understand them ourselves.
Yeah.
I mean, take the example of the aerodynamics that I told you before. There's no point in finding a very complex wording to ban a certain shape of a wing if they are smarter than you and they will
Yeah.
get around it and you will not be able to check it. I mean, now it's like this, tomorrow like this.
Yeah.
We can do that with a ruler. Okay, we
Yeah.
can check it. So
Because
yes.
that, again, is a really important part of a rules package, is
Yeah.
you have to be able to enforce it. Because if it's so complex that there's only 3 people in the world who understand it, then...
Yes. So the answer is yes. We always care about that. It doesn't mean that we always succeed, but it's always in our minds when we consider these things.
Is the racing going to be better in 2027, or different, or the same but slower?
Until a couple of races ago, I would have said better, but how can you improve?
Yeah, the past couple of races have been pretty good.
No, but honestly, the goal is to have a better show, better than the exceptional show we already have.
Yeah.
So we are facing a very hard challenge, but ask me in 4 years' time.
Yeah, okay. Okay, Corrado, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks very much to Corrado for taking the time. And David, that was a really good interview to be able to get with him as well about the new regulations coming in 2027. We have a question in from Escape Orion, who asks whether or not we'll see Mark become the villain again now that he's Gigi's rider. And Adam, I know this is one that got you chuckling a little bit when you saw it for the first time.
Yeah, but how do we define a villain? You know, is that because he's taking on Valentino Rossi's, I don't know, team or momentum or whatever? I mean, are we going back to that? I know it's nearly 10 years since Sepang, but wow, almost a decade. But
wow,
it's
you've managed to shoehorn the
yes
Sepang reference in. We maintain our streak. What's this, episode 413 or something? And for at least 300 of them, we've mentioned Sepang in some way.
Exactly. No, I mean, like, will he be the villain? People like disliking him, so of course he will be the villain soon. He'll be extremely excited, much more excited to see what Pedro Acosta can do to him, start to upset him. So let's see.
I think for me, it's always interesting with Mark because right now he's exceptionally likable, and being successful as him, quite a strange situation where people are willing you to succeed, and then for next year. It could get very tired very quickly that Mark's back to winning ways. For me, there's something about the excellence of Mark whenever he's on form, but there's something that's even more captivating when he isn't on form because he just tries to fuck things up. And I'm really excited to see how he gets in Pecco's ear and tries to just make him miserable. And that could be something as simple as just trying to go down the opposite route of Pecco in terms of bike development, or it could be sitting there in a debrief and just just trying to unsettle him. So I think that's where he can still be the villain, and I think that's where he's really interesting. Just one other thing that's quite interesting is the talk that we saw about Silverstone's throwback liveries as well, and I'm very curious as to see David Emmett's response to this, because David, obviously you're most excited for the classic Honda livery to make a comeback, get back to the Repsol Honda that we all know and love from 1995 up until this year, and then bring it back as the ultimate act of just pure trolling of MotoGP fans.
I have no opinions about MotoGP liveries. I think also nostalgia is terrible and should be banned.
Neil, Dave's obviously the worst man in the world to ask that question to, but you're probably the best person in the world to ask it, because I'm sure you could give us about 400 liveries that you want to see at Silverstone.
Of course, yeah. I actually think it's a pretty cool idea. 75th season of Grand Prix racing was last year. This is, so I guess, they're having to toast it in some way. But yeah, I mean, it's genuinely an opportunity to see some great liveries. You have to imagine Yamaha will run something in the style of, Kenny Roberts' old bikes back in the day. And I mean, there's a whole host of other potential color schemes that could come up, which would be quite spicy. So yeah, I think it's a pretty cool initiative, and I think it's going to be pretty fun Friday morning at Silverstone just to go down and see what everyone's got.
I have to say, I think I'd love to see a return of like the Chesterfield livery for Aprilia. I think back to Max on the 250 or something like that. It'll be interesting to see what everyone ends up running, because obviously Aprilia, as the factory entry, have a lot that they can go back on. But do Trackhouse go to one of those classic Aprilia liveries, or do they use something that they've had from their racing heritage? Obviously, it's not a MotoGP heritage for them, but they've still got a decent run of racing in America as well. So it'd be interesting to see how everyone tries to play it out.
Also, I think it maybe would have been a bit more apt to Assen, but I think the question purely was of time, because you have to remember the teams have to get the components of the bikes ready for this. They have to get it designed, they have to get it sprayed, of how fairings are homologated, so they can only sort of have so many, or they only have so many sort of in the back of the truck ready to go. So it's also an exercise of logistics, and that'll be really good to see what they come up with.
Yeah, if you think back to the amount of times whenever riders, Adam, have gone out with their special home leathers and then proceeded to crash in the warm-up session, it is going to be interesting to see the spares that everyone brings for their Silverstone as well. And I'm excited to see what it's going to be like. I think it's always quite cool when you see football teams use oval jerseys or whatever else. So I think this could be something that works quite well. So I think it's a good initiative. Are you excited for it, Adam, overall?
Yeah, definitely. I think the sport should be doing a lot more to celebrate its heritage and its history. And, whether it's retro posters or old riders or old machines, it's so much more could be done. So I think this liveries is one sort of step to make. I want to see what else they want to cover.
Yeah, and obviously for us as well, Adam, it's going to be one of those things that over the course of the next while we'll be keeping an eye on, see if we're able to hear anything from them. Obviously, Ducati over the last few years have had a few special liveries at home rounds in Misano or Mugello, and it'll be interesting to see what they end up going for from it. So I'm excited to see how it all plays out. And obviously enough for us on the podcast, we're going to be pretty busy over the next few weeks. I've got World Superbikes coming back in action this weekend at Misano. So myself, Gordo, and Evo will be recapping all the action at the end of the Misano round. And I'm quite curious to see how everything goes from that. Gordo's been busy at the test, so I think that it'll be interesting to see what he has to say. So on Patreon, we're going to have a little bit of a testing recap as well on Thursday.
Hang on, Steve. You can't leave the podcast or finish the podcast without gloating about your Alpinestars Paddock Pass Podcast Fantasy League position, surely.
We're on a week off. There's no need to worry about fantasy, Adam. There's no need to worry about it. It's been a disaster. I have to say, I've put absolutely minimal effort into it, and that has paid off in spades by still being ahead of you and Neil, and miles behind Dave, who somehow this year has managed to make it work. I'm actually going to focus on the European Championships for fantasy for the next month. That's going to be what I'm focused on, and I'd say I'll have to load it up with a few Germans for that one and see how that goes. Because obviously, Adam, you're going to be excitedly watching the football over the next few weeks and waiting for England to be disappointed in the latter stages again.
Well, I know Dave has to sign off, Steve, so perhaps we shouldn't talk too much about football on this podcast, but certainly we can do it next week when the tournament starts.
Yeah, well, obviously David's in and out of internet connection there in Greg's, but if he comes back, obviously, Dave, it's been exciting to have a little chat about the technical rules, and there he is back for our YouTube YouTube users and telling them that they're his number one fans. Yeah, exactly. Dave, give the thumbs up there with a mouthful of Greg's. And Neil, we'll be back next week as well in the pod and previewing the action from Assen. So Adam's favourite round at the Cathedral of Speed.
Well, hold on, Steve. We've got another week off after that, so you're getting a wee bit ahead of yourself.
Oh,
yeah,
my
we do indeed.
I thought it was
yeah. I mean, I'm going to motocross,
the calendar.
so there we go.
Yeah. But we will have some extra juicy stuff coming to all of our listeners next week, no doubt.
Yeah, we have had a lot of additional content through the course of the season on Patreon. So check out patreon.com/Paddock Pass Podcast and sign up to become a Paddock Insider for all of our top content as well. And as ever on the podcast, big thank you to Renthal, Street Fly Racing and KTM for supporting us on the podcast. Adam, you're obviously going to be on your KTM 990 from next week, and you got a nice Fly Racing helmet as well.
Yeah, an off-road one, Steve, so I won't be using that. I'll be using my Bell instead, which actually is a really good lid as well. I can recommend it to anybody. But yeah, riding the KTM, not for long though. MXGP Grand Prix of Italy coming up, so that will be my weekend taken care of coming up.
Yeah, no weekends off for you then, Ad. But obviously for us in the podcast, no weekends off either. We'll be back next week looking back at the action from the Misano World Superbike Round, myself and Ivo and Gordo, and then getting everyone ready for the summer MotoGP as well.